Okay, so anyone who's been following the news has probably heard all this talk about China and the US economically and like decoupling. We got this video you sent in with an expert, and we're going to deep dive into it today. Not just like give you the summary, we're going for those insights that'll really help make sense of it all.
Yeah, and something I found really interesting is this whole idea of decoupling. It's not exactly new. China's been diversifying its economic relationships for years,
Mm.
long before the tensions with the U.S. got really serious.
Right, so they're not just reacting, they've been really proactive about having a plan B or
Mm.
even a plan C.
Exactly. Spreading those bets, they've been expanding their trade partners, not putting all their eggs in one basket anymore.
So they're already less dependent on the US. Smart move.
Totally. Take China's Belt and Road Initiative. They're securing access to resources and markets all across Eurasia, building new trade routes so they're less reliant on the U.S.
So it's like they saw this decoupling coming down the road
Right?
and thought, okay, let's get ahead of it.
Absolutely. And get this, the trade war a few years back between the U.S. and China actually sped this whole process up.
So those tariffs that were supposed to hurt China actually kind of helped them.
In a way, yeah. It pushed China to find new markets for its products, made them diversify even faster.
Huh, so it's like reverse psychology. So where are they focusing now?
Brazil's a big one, and other Asian countries, building stronger ties. They're even creating alternative financial systems, like setting up these agreements where they can trade in yuan instead of dollars.
So it's not just finding new customers, they're creating a whole new system that doesn't rely on the US as much.
Exactly. And it all plays into this long-term strategy of moving away from the U.S. dollar.
Which brings up a massive question. What if the dollar's dominance actually starts to slip? The expert in the video made that seem like a real possibility.
Oh yeah, and this is where things get even more interesting. China and Russia are exploring alternatives to the dollar big time. We're talking digital currencies like the digital yuan, special agreements for trade in their own currencies. It's a whole new financial playing field.
Which could totally shift the balance of power globally.
Oh, for sure. If the dollar loses its top spot as the world's reserve currency, it could have a huge impact on the American economy and its influence around the world.
So this isn't just about trade or tariffs anymore. It's like a fundamental shift in the whole global economic order.
Yeah, it is. And that's why it's so important to understand these shifts
Huh.
for everyone, not just countries.
It's wild to think about. We use the dollar every single day, but what if that wasn't the automatic go-to anymore?
Exactly. And that's just one part of this whole complex situation. We have to look at the challenges China's facing internally, too. It's
Ah,
not all smooth sailing for them.
right. China's got this big, long game plan, but they've got some hurdles to deal with too. Like,
Well, their real estate market's been struggling, and that's a huge part of their economy. Then you've got low consumer confidence and rising debt levels.
so they're trying to make these big global moves, but they've got problems at home too.
Exactly. And what's interesting is these internal issues aren't all because of U.S. pressure. A lot of it stems from their own economic policies.
It just goes to show, even economic superpowers aren't perfect. They have their weaknesses too. So what's China doing to address these problems?
Well, the expert in the video made it clear that the government's not ignoring this stuff. They know they have to find solutions. The big question is, can they stimulate the economy without making their debt even worse?
It's like trying to fix a car while it's still running.
Exactly. They need to encourage spending and investment, but without triggering a debt crisis. And their economic policies are going to be key here. This is where things could get really tricky.
Yeah, it's a real tightrope walk. And this is where it gets even more interesting. How is China actually managing these vulnerabilities while they're trying to assert themselves globally? Okay, so we talked about how they're preparing for this decoupling thing, but what's that actually look like?
Well, the expert pointed to a few things. One big one is strengthening ties with other emerging markets.
So it's not just about depending less on the US, it's about building up these other relationships.
Yeah, exactly. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket anymore. New trade deals, investing in big infrastructure projects, like ports, railways,
Yeah.
building diplomatic relationships all over.
So they're creating this like parallel system where they have more control,
Right.
less vulnerability to US influence.
Exactly. And, a lot of these countries, they also want to diversify their own economies, get away from relying so much on the U.S. dollar.
Which brings us back to that whole dollar thing. It seems like everything China does is part of this plan to chip away at the dollar's power.
Absolutely. They're pushing their own currency, the yuan, to be used more in international trade. And they're not just talking about us, they're putting things in place to make it happen.
Like this currency swap agreements?
Exactly. Those agreements let them trade directly with other countries using yuan. No U.S. dollars needed. And then they've got this digital yuan they're working on. It's a central bank digital currency, which could really shake things up.
It's like they're setting the stage for a future where the yuan is a major player.
That's exactly it. It's a long game. But it's clear they're serious about this.
Which is a pretty bold move. It's like they're saying, hey, world, we're not just going to play by your rules anymore. We're going to change the game.
And that has big implications for the U.S. If the dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency, it could be a huge blow to their economy.
Could make it more expensive for the U.S. to borrow money, slow down their growth.
Right? And it could weaken their influence globally. Having the dollar as the world's top currency has been a huge advantage for decades. Losing that would be a major shift in the balance of power.
So this isn't just about economics, it's about geopolitics, too.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Yep.
And it's something everyone should be paying attention to, not just the experts.
It's going to affect all of us one way or another.
I couldn't agree more.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah, but the point is, the world's changing, and we got to adapt.
If we want to keep up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The old rules don't apply anymore. Understanding how things are shifting is crucial
For making smart decisions.
in your personal life, your work.
Now, in the middle of all this talk about global power and currencies, the expert also talked about the challenges China's dealing with internally.
Yes, and that's important. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget that China's got its own problems.
And those problems could really affect their ability to reach their goal.
Oh, absolutely. One of their biggest ones is their aging population,
Right, their workforce is shrinking.
which puts a strain on economic growth.
You need people to drive innovation and productivity.
Exactly. And then there's rising inequality. The gap between the rich and the poor is getting wider.
Which can lead to all sorts of problems.
Yeah, social unrest, instability.
Not good.
And let's not forget about the environmental issues. Pollution is a huge problem in China.
Affects public health and the environment.
Exactly. So these are big problems that go way beyond just economics.
They affect social stability and sustainability in the long run.
Right. And they won't be easy to solve. But China has a history of overcoming challenges. They've been remarkably resilient in the past.
And their government can make big decisions and put them into action quickly.
Yeah, so while these challenges are serious, I wouldn't underestimate China
It'll be interesting to see how they handle all this.
and how their choices affect everyone else.
Because what happens in China doesn't stay in China.
It has ripple effects all over the world.
All right, so we've talked about a lot. China trying to decouple from the U.S., the dollar maybe losing its power, challenges China's facing at home. But how does this all affect someone like me or you just trying to make sense of the world today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We could look at these big global trends, but we got to bring it back down to earth.
Right, because sometimes it feels like these massive economic things are just totally out of our control.
I hear you. It's easy to feel that way. But even though most of us aren't like signing trade deals or minting new currencies, this stuff can actually impact our jobs, the prices we pay for things, even where we invest our money.
So how can we use this knowledge to make smarter decisions then?
Well, think about those new trade relationships China's building. It could create new markets for businesses, which could mean more jobs in those areas. But it also means some industries could become more reliant on those new partners, which makes them vulnerable if something goes wrong in those regions.
So it's a double-edged sword. It's about understanding those connections and being ready for whatever might happen.
Exactly. And that shift away from the dollar, that's something to keep an eye on too. Could it affect everything from how much it costs to travel to what happens to our savings?
Makes you wonder about all those assumptions we have about how the world works. Like, we just assume the dollar is always going to be on top, but what if that changes?
Exactly. It shows us how much things are changing. And it's not just about China. It's about this whole shift in global power.
And how the U.S. responds to that is going to be crucial.
Absolutely. It's both a challenge and an opportunity. Can the U.S. find new ways to compete and work with others in this new landscape? Can they hold on to their influence even if the dollar is not king of the hill anymore?
Big questions. So for someone listening to this deep dive, what's the main takeaway?
I think the big thing is this. The world is changing, and it's changing fast. We have to be aware of these shifts to navigate them.
It's not about predicting the future. It's about understanding what's driving it and making informed choices.
Exactly. And for you listening, think about this. How could a shift away from the dollar affect your own life? What skills or knowledge are going to be more valuable in this new world?
Great questions to think about, because this deep dive wasn't just about China. It was about understanding the world we live in and how to thrive in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember, this is just the beginning. We've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn if you're interested.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, stay curious. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be for whatever comes next.
Well said. And one last thought. If we connect this to the bigger picture, how might the rise of other currencies change the balance of power globally? How will countries adapt? It's a story that's still being written. Definitely worth paying attention to.
It's a wild time to be alive. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring.